So welcome to another webinar. We've had a series of webinars this year, and this is the second to the last one for the year. So today we're speaking about how to design a winning proposal, and we have none other than Gima Forje, who is the CEO of TY Danjuma Foundation. And for those who are unfamiliar with TY Danjuma Foundation, it's one of the first indigenous not non-profit. I'm used to talking about non-profits. It's one of the first indigenous foundations on the continent that is grant making. They've been doing this for over 20 years. And even more recently, they started giving long-term grants, long-term unrestricted. And he will share more about that. I hope I got that right. And I will share a little bit about him as an individual, and then he would speak to the organization's work, and then he would go on to talk about the topic of the day. So Gima is an experienced grants administrator and nonprofit manager with a history of working effectively on results-oriented and sustainable projects, skilled in coaching others, financial management, project monitoring, and program evaluation. He is a humanitarian with strong leadership skills, passionate about promoting grassroots initiatives that support the livelihood of people in underserved communities. He has a keen interest in questions of social justice, rule of law, good governance, and inclusive development. It is my pleasure to welcome our distinguished speaker of today, a long-term friend of African Philanthropy Forum, Gima Forje.
Thank you, Musu. Thank you so much. And thank you to every other person that have joined online. I must start by thanking the APF team for organizing this, and especially for all the work that has gone on in the background. It's been a lot of work in the background. But more importantly, because I was there when APF started the work around StartPoint, and just to see how you are building a vibrant community around StartPoint and really using it to support nonprofit. I think it's work well done, and I really wanted to start by appreciating you for that. And I'm happy to be part of this journey. So thank you also for the kind introduction. I'll talk a little bit about the TY Danjuma Foundation. If you permit me, I will share my screen. I'll talk a little bit about the foundation. Then we will move into the business of the day. I'm not sure if you can see my screen.
We can see it.
Okay, great.
It's not in presentation mode though.
It's not?
Yes, but we can see it.
Okay, I was hoping.
Perfect.
Is it better now?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So yes, I work with the TY Danjuma Foundation. The foundation was started in 2009, went fully operational in 2010. In-house, we find it difficult to separate the founder and chairman from the foundation because basically he has started doing this work from 1996 out of his pocket. And he was compelled to start an institution to complete or continue the work he had been doing out of his pocket. So these days we ask ourselves, who is the foundation? Is it the founder or is it the institution? But yes, we started in 2009 and we're continuing the work that he's been doing. And when he set out to create the foundation, he wanted to create an institution that will help nonprofit in Nigeria and make sure that it's different from the Western institution that we were used to. And for that reason, he took his time to do a study and to come and set up a foundation that runs an endowment. And part of the proceeds on that endowment is what we give out as grants to organizations across Nigeria. And so far, we've worked now with close to 400 organizations, and we're working with more, and we've given out so much in grants, over $40 million. Now, what I found really interesting about today's discussion is the fact that, it's about designing winning proposals. I think, because that is the core of what we do. And I wanted to start by saying you have all sorts of organizations and foundations out there that do request for proposals, they are not a homogeneous group. They are different in character, different in shape, different in size, different in interest. So I thought I should put that background because what I'll be sharing is based on our experience at the T.Y. Danjuma Foundation, but also our interaction with other donors within the different networks in which we find ourselves. And I do realize that, some of the things I share here may not apply to every donor, but for the vast majority of cases, what I'll be sharing will be what you hear from other donors. Now, so I wanted to put this background. It is very, very important as a grant seeker, as a nonprofit, to understand that donors are key. They're so keen on due diligence. And we need to have this in the back of our mind, that frame, that at all times, donors are thinking about due diligence. This relationship between donors and due diligence is at the core of whatever a donor is doing. And once you understand that mindset, it helps you in approaching a donor, whether you're having a conversation with them, you're putting forward a concept note or a proposal, it helps. Why? Because due diligence will help a donor to understand the organizational health of a partner they want to engage with, or work with. It just helps them understand them better. It helps them understand their staff strength, their finances, their governance structure. So every time a donor is interacting with a new partner, a new organization, they're about to make grants to a new institution, they try and think through a process of due diligence so that, they're engaging the right partner and they're engaging even the right partner at the right level. And so once you have this at the back of your mind, you're in a better position when engaging with donors. And why is this important? It is important for the donor because, the work of giving out grants is also a risk-taking endeavor, and you want to minimize that risk. You want to make sure that you've taken precaution and you're relating with partners that will deliver on their mandate and on the things they propose to do. And this is important because once you understand it as a grant applicant, then you're in a better position to write what you may term winning proposals. And talking about winning proposals, I said at the beginning that, there are different donors, different organizations that put out application. But from our own experience and interaction with people within our network, here are some of the things which we find as common in terms of points which should reflect, or points which partners should think about, points which applicants should think about if they want to develop a winning proposal. This is very, very important because you must keep in mind that donors will get a lot of applications, and if you want yours to stand out, then there are a couple of things you need to do. Again, if I share from the experience of the T.Y. Danjuma Foundation, the first year I joined the foundation in 2010, we had over 650 applications. There were 5 staff to review those 650 applications. They were supposed to review them in a week. Eventually, they had to review in about 2 weeks. I mean, each person reviewing over 100 and something application. Now, when you think about the pressure on staff time, you think about how much energy has to go into reviewing those proposals, you realize that if you don't do certain things and you do not do them well, your proposal may just not get the right kind of attention because you just miss out on a couple of things. So to write a winning proposal, some points are important to keep in mind. Number one is that there has to be a problem. You have to be trying to solve a problem. And this problem has to be clearly defined and it has to be relevant to the donor's interest. So if the donor wants to provide water to people in Lagos, you have to be talking about not just providing water to people in Lagos, but providing water to people in Lagos who are in need of water. So somebody who is trying to provide water in a community that does not have even a borehole or pipe-on water will stand a better chance than somebody who wants to provide water to people in VI. We do understand that the donor wants to provide water in Lagos, but the problem has to be relevant to the interests of the donor and relevant to the interests of the community you want to serve. Secondly, is that everything has to be evidence-based. If you have a solution to a problem, there's a problem that you've identified that exists in a particular community where you want to work, and you're proposing a solution, you have to find a way to show the donor that, look, this solution is grounded in evidence, and there is a way in which we can measure at the end to show that the solution worked, or that the outcome was realized, or that as a result of this initiative we're going to implement, that is why we had this outcome. So you have to be able to convince a donor in that way. And a very important point is that even when you have a good proposal with all the evidence outlined there, and the donor is convinced that this proposal will achieve the desired outcome, you need to go a step further. And this is to show that you have the capacity, you are able as an institution to implement the proposal and achieve the result you outline in the proposal. So without being able to demonstrate capacity, you may be in trouble, even if you have a good proposal that they do not believe, will yield the solutions you're proposing. So institutions are under responsibility to show that they have operational capacity to implement the things that are in their proposal. Do you have the right staff? Do you have the right network of partners to work with? Those are things to think through. So after you have a good proposal, who is going to do this? Who are the people I'm working with? Sometimes the donors just ask for CV of your staff. You need to ask people to send those CVs probably for you to review and make sure that, skills outlined in the CV do also align with some of the things that have to be done as outlined in the proposal. Sometimes they ask you to just write a summary of the staff that are going to play a key role in the project implementation. You need to think through it carefully and make sure that you answer those questions in a way that shows that your organization or institution has the capacity to implement the proposal. Now, another important point is, linking your own mission as an institution, your vision and mission, to the interest of the donor. In our experience, we've had cases where, an organization is set up, for instance, to do mining in Plateau State, and then we want to do an education project. And they do apply that, they want to execute such a project, and they give us a very good proposal. And then the challenge for us become, all what we see about them and their experiences talk about, them being in the field of mining different minerals and so on. We don't see much about education. And in fact, if you look at the mission of the organization, an organization set up to, support artisan mining and stuff like that, what's the link between that and our own mission? So, it's the responsibility of the applicant when you have, such missions that do not clearly align with that of a donor, to find a way of linking your mission to the donor's interest and making sure that, that the donor will understand that whatever your mission is aligned also with the things the donor does and wants to do. The budget is an important component of proposals that are reviewed by donors. And one thing about the budget is that it is a document that gets a lot of attention and a lot of scrutiny, because everything ties down to Naira and Kobo to achieve certain activities. And so donors tend to spend a lot of time, screening and scrutinizing the budget. So as an applicant, you have a responsibility to make sure that your budget is cost effective. It represents, current market trends, but also importantly, it's a representation of the activities you propose to implement. Sometimes you get budgets that are incomplete. They do not cover all the activities that, an applicant is proposing to implement. Sometimes the budget is too bogus, unclear, overly ambitious, become a challenge for the donor. But for me, the most important one is that donors may give a budget, say 5 million. They say the ceiling for this intervention should be maximum 5 million. Then you get applicants who submit a budget of 6 million, 5.1, 5.2. That is very risky, because again, with the age of, technology, sometimes, softwares will just beat you out because your budget is above the ceiling. And, that way, your proposal doesn't even get the attention to be reviewed. So you have to be careful, stick to the budget and make sure that, it's cost effective, but also, you are not going one kobo above, the budget proposed by the donor. Now, for most organizations and most funders, they would like to make sure that, whatever investment they are doing is sustainable. And it's the responsibility of applicants to give a sustainability plan that is realistic. There's a temptation to just write a generic statement, and once you put that, the donor should go ahead and treat it as a sustainability plan. Many donors pay attention to your sustainability plan because the hope is that, especially when donors are hoping that the investment will be somewhat catalytic, government or others to take it forward from there after their resources stop flowing to the partner, you have to find a proper sustainability plan that shows that, at the end of the intervention, there are other partners or there are ways in which, if the beneficiaries are supposed to get continuous service, they will continue to get them. Now here I couple other things that, sometimes you may not see in the proposal or request for proposal, but that eventually become key into whether or not, you get funding from a donor. Remember that I started by saying, due diligence is key to funders. They are very keen on due diligence. So even if you submitted a very good proposal with a budget that people are convinced is cost-effective, realistic sustainability plan, the donor may still end up not funding an organization if they do not have the required statutory document. So just make sure that in terms of incorporation, the documents are in place. And if you have to be paying your taxes, you pay those taxes. So just the required documents for you to operate effectively as a non-profit, you need to have those in place because when donors are about to release resources, they would require to see some of those documents. So it's a responsibility of grant seekers to make sure that their documentation are up to speed with what is required by the government or the environment in which they operate. Now, finally, this point about writing winning proposal, it is very important for institutions to be able to show that they have an established accountability process or structures where, there's governance that is clearly delineated by board oversight over management, and even within management, you have segregation of role. Everything is not concentrated in the hands of one person who can just write a check and get monies out of the bank. So it's very important that you have documentation to show some form of segregation of duty and governance oversight in your institution. That way, donors and funders are at ease, relating with you as an institution. Now, having said that, I must say lots of organizations do understand how to write winning proposals, but you also have a whole lot that do not fully understand this. So it brings me to some of the common pitfalls that we do see and have seen in the application process we've dealt with over the years. The first is that, truly, there are just organizations that will not follow the guidelines provided by a funder. Guidelines are important. Every guideline has a reason for which you see on a call for proposal. So it's important to follow every guideline. Sometimes the problem that are being proposed as problems to be resolved are quite ambiguous, difficult to understand, and not very clear. You have to keep the problem you're talking about clear and make it, in a way that whoever reads it understand that this is a problem and why it is a problem and the people affected by the problem. Sometimes, even when organizations do that, the goal, the things they want to achieve in solving that problem can be overly ambitious. So think about it this way. For over a couple of years, there's been a lot of talk about, the million of children that are out of schools. And so a lot of development partners are trying to do something about it. So when you get a proposal, for instance, you have an organization that writes and say, well, we saw your call for proposal to do something about education, for example, in Bauchi State, and we want to make sure that in the next 2 years, we have 90% of the out-of-school children back in school. It becomes problematic quite an ambitious goal because the donor must ask a couple other questions. How many children are out of school right now? How do you get 90% out of school children back to school? So just make sure that, in terms of the goal, it does not become overly ambitious that, makes the donor think this may not be realized. Secondly, or thirdly, you have the challenge of linking activities and expected outcome in a way that is measurable. So when there's a problem and you're proposing activities to implement a solution, the donor is reading and trying to follow the logic. And in-house, we like talking about if somebody said they were going to Lagos, do they want to go to Accra and South Africa before getting to Lagos? They definitely will get to Lagos if they went that route. Fly from Abuja, for instance, to Accra, fly again from Accra to South Africa, charter a bus from there and be driving. You're coming to Lagos. Eventually, you will get to Lagos. But that's not what the donor wants. They want you to use the shortest route possible, the most cost-effective route to get to the solution. So if there's another person saying, well, we will get a flight from Abuja to Lagos, that person stands a greater chance. So the activities you want to implement and the expected outcome can be the problem in the proposal, because if you want to implement certain activities that are not directly linked to the expected outcome you mentioned, it can be a challenge. We spoke about the budget earlier. Some of the common pitfalls we see is that, budget may be unclear. So budget notes are important. So donors do not know everything. They do know some things and the things that they're interested in. But again, as a partner, if you are applying for funding and you want some activities or some items that have a technical meaning within your own organization or within a particular space in which you belong, it's always important to have budget notes. And even when you're funding something that is very clear, sometimes you need budget notes to explain why that funding has to happen. So it's a very important point to have a budget, but also have note added to the budget. Now, with regards to the sustainability plan, a common mistake is to have, fake sustainability plans. I give you an example. For a lot of organizations that we categorize their sustainability plans as being fake, you will see a statement like, at the end of funding from your foundation, we will discuss with government to take it forward. We will discuss with government to continue supporting the initiative. Now, the challenge for someone who is on the side of the donor is, who is government? Government is huge. Government is not one person, one spot. Is it state? Is it federal? Is it local government? What department in government? Do they have the budget? How do you get them to? So you have to avoid something that is too generic. If you're going to deal with government, you're talking about Ministry of Education, Directorate of Teachers Training, you go down to the specific, so that way, there's clarity in what you're trying to do with regards to your sustainability plan. Then sometimes we do get proposals that are dependent on secured funding from other sources. So an applicant is hoping that if they do get funding from a particular donor at some point, they will sustain their intervention. Or in fact, even the activity to be funded is partly dependent on funding to come from another source. While partnership is good and it's a good thing to be encouraged, it is very important to keep in mind that if you are approaching one donor and saying funding for a particular activity is also contingent on you receiving funding from a second donor, the donor may also want to wait a little bit and be sure that you get that funding before they fund the initiative. So you want to deal with a proposal for a donor in isolation if you're not clear that you're going to get funding or there's commitment for funding from another source. It can be a challenge introducing that, because if you introduce that you're hoping to get funding from another source, the likelihood is for the donor to wait and be sure that you get that funding. Now, when we think through all what we've been discussing so far, one might be tempted to ask themselves, so truly, what would a strong proposal, what would a strong proposal look like? What I try to talk as the anatomy of a strong proposal. It has to have a clearly defined problem, clearly relevant to the local context. It has to be relevant to the environment in which you want to talk about this problem. It has to be relevant. It has to be evidence-based. Without doing that, there's a challenge. It has to be a problem that is not generic. It can't just be a problem that has been stated by government, for instance, as a challenge, but you have to nip it down to the particular community or environment where you want to work and show how it is a problem and how that is relevant, and relevant to the extent that how is this challenge or problem affecting the lives of people in the areas in which you want to work. Secondly, I just mentioned earlier that, sometimes the goals and objectives can be too broad and elaborate, difficult for one to believe that they're achievable. We're in agreement that objectives, as I hear all the time, have to be SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and of course, time-bound. Time-bound, so you're not working in perpetuity. Additionally, sometimes even when you have a good proposal with clearly defined problems and well-written objectives that are SMART, the method, the approach, the way in which activities are lined up may not give one a sense of a logical flow towards the realization of said outcomes. So you must, again, think through how you want to go about your activities, how they are organized, a kind of logic that shows that each activity is making incremental progress towards the realization of set objectives and the bigger goal. It's very important to think again through the activities you want to implement. Like this activity, what objective will it help us realize? Because again, for the donor, you're looking through each activity and asking yourself, which of the goals is this tied to? How does it help them realize what they want to do in this project? Now, all proposals are always centered around trying to realize a certain kind of outcome or an impact in life, in society, that would help advance the mission of the organization or that of the donor. Problem here is that sometimes the impact or the outcome are difficult to measure. So for a strong proposal, you must also indicate, some form of indicators, some form of verification that shows that the outcome set to achieve will be achieved and will be used as those means of verification will be used to show that those outcomes were achieved, that the impact was achieved, and here are indicators to show how we can check if the impact was achieved. Another important point is that nobody wants to give funds to an organization that will not monitor and evaluate what is going on in terms of project implementation. You want to be sure that there's continuous monitoring of activities, but also that at the end, there's some form of evaluation to show that, the project was impactful. So again, it is incumbent on applicants to show that, they are going to use the right framework in monitoring different activities and of course in evaluating the outcome. Then with regards to sustainability, one must truly demonstrate, if you have a strong proposal, the only way this proposal will stand out is that you have a sustainability plan that is truly not generic, that is original, that is realistic, that makes sense, is possible, that the things you talk about can be achieved. Without having that kind of sustainability plan, it becomes challenging to have a very strong proposal. Now, I'm stating all of this because, again, remember we started by talking about due diligence, because if you look at things through the lens of the donor, you realize that at every point in time, the donor is asking themselves, this proposal, does it fit with our own strategic priorities? Does it fit with our own strategic goals? And as a grant seeker, you need to try and see things through the lens of the donor as well. Because if you see things through the lens of the donor, then you try and align your proposal with the strategic interests of the donor. The donor is always asking, do they have the track record to do what they want to do? Is this a credible partner we can work with? If you know the donor is thinking that way, then you are also ready to make sure that your proposal is making a case for you that you do have the track record, or you do know people with a track record and you'll be working with them to deliver on all what you outline in your proposal. Your budget, we've spoken about it, because the donor is constantly asking, is it value for money? Is it realistic? Is this value for money? It's always a big thing with donors. What's the value for this money? And of course, it's a relevant question. So you want to do a budget that is realistic. You want to show the donor that, with little investment, they're achieving so much in terms of social return, in terms of touching people's life. So it is then your responsibility to show that, there is value for every kobo you receive. To verify impact, the donor will be asking, how do we go about checking whether this thing in the end was impactful? This is important, yeah, because if it's impactful, the prospective partner will say it is impactful, but they don't know how do they go around to verify. So again, it's for the grant seeker to clearly point out to those pathways through which, the donor can move and verify and see that, this project has been impactful. Importantly, very important point I'm mentioning here for the first time in this discussion, risk management. What are the risks associated with this initiative, this proposal, this institution we want to work with, or the partners that they want to work with? So sometimes, the donors will ask that, the partners identify the risk and mitigating measures they're putting in place or they plan to take to deal with those risks. But beyond that, also, the donor is always asking themselves whether there are risks associated with you, those that, the grant seeker may not have enumerated in their own application. So it's good to think, system-wide, so that, if there are risks within your institution that, you think may jeopardize your chances of getting funding from a particular donor, you are quick to have identified those risks and have mitigating measures in place so that, the donor is not the one trying to point them out to you. Now, there is a point here about how to stand out. How do you stand out as an applicant when you send your proposal to the donor? And this is to sum it up our discussion. The first and most important is that, I can't emphasize this enough. Adhere to all the requirements and instruction. It's very important that, you're sticking to all the requirements and instruction. If you do not do that, you may get your proposal not even reviewed. I gave the example of how when I just joined the TY Danjuma Foundation, officers have to be reviewing about 120 proposals in a week. And if you submitted a budget that was more than the budget limit, the easy solution to that is the proposal has a budget that is beyond what we require for. Well, that is way out of what we want to give out as grants, so we cannot review it. You see, so you have to be careful when you do that. Number two is, tailor your proposal to the specific needs of different donors. I know that, you have different donors working, for instance, in the area of health. And even if it down, you say maternal and child health, you have different donors. There are different donors with different requirements. The fact that one particular proposal was funded by donor A does not mean that, the next one, B, will do the same. So you need to check their requirement, check what are their specific interests, and make sure that your proposal is tailored towards the specific need of each donor you approach. Data is key to every point we make in a proposal. Storytelling is also very important. Sometimes donors will give you the room to write extensively. Please, by all means, incorporate data and storytelling into your proposal writing, because then it drives home the point in a way that is relatable to people easily. And even if they do not give you enough room to write long comments, I think that, you do well to your institution and to the proposal by incorporating all the relevant data that is needed to make your case strong, and any story that will drive home the point. Collaboration is key. even when donors ask you about how to make projects sustainable or how project becomes sustainable when the funding ends, sometimes you would have answered this and give them less worry about digging into what you write in your sustainability plan, because once you write and you make a case that whatever project or intervention you want to undertake is tied to community partnership, government participation, and clearly defined role for each of those, people are less worried. They see that, the relevant stakeholders are carried along, and, somehow it will generate interest and everybody will want things to work hopefully. But that way, it shows that you value collaboration and partnership, which is something which is strongly encouraged, right? After all, that is one of the sustainable development goals. They say, goal 17, how we can partner towards the realization of the remaining 16. So donors like partnership because the more the merrier, and it is easier to get everybody carried along that way. A very important point that one should keep in mind if you really want to stand out is to keep your proposal brief. Keep it brief, 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 brief. Very important. You keep it clear and brief. This is important because when you write too much, you are prone to mistakes and you give room to question many more things. If they say 200 words, as people put sometimes section, just keep it as brief as you can. If they give you a free hand to just write and submit, still try and keep it as brief as possible, because the longer you write, the more you create, or generate statement that may require clarity and questions. So in my experience, I think that, the shorter the proposal, the better for the person writing. And also, it generates more interest in the person reviewing. The reality is that, proposals are being reviewed by humans. And these human beings, when they read so many proposals, they tend to have an idea of what is good, what may be somewhere in the average. And you see that, when they suspect that this looks like a very good proposal, they tend to pay more attention to those. So when you stick to the guideline, you are trying to relate things to the specific donor, you use stories and data to show what you're doing, you talk about collaboration and you keep it brief, you generate more interest. People want to read some more. And then finally, importantly, whatever you do, you need to keep showing the donor that this money, these resources, this investment will translate into outcomes that are relevant to your mission, your vision, and the objective you set for yourself at the institution. So you look carefully at the institution, at what they're trying to do, and you're pointing back to them to show that, all what we are trying to do here relates again to what you are doing. I think that is important because sometimes, again, the donor is reading and asking themselves, how is this relevant to our work? And they need to think through. So you pointing that out may help just refresh somebody's mind who's reading your proposal. Finally, what must we do to stand out as an applicant? We've mentioned all of this, right? Stick to instruction, align to the donor's priority, provide evidence. Your narrative has to be very logical. You demonstrate capacity to implement. You have to demonstrate that your organization as an institution has a capacity to implement. If you have doubt, please ask questions, unless the donor specifically says, oh, do not send us emails, do not call us while you're applying, but that would be rare. If you have doubt, just ask questions, clarify so that you do not make mistakes when a question would have helped you better understand the situation. Stick to the budget, and make sure you do not go even one kobo above the budget. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes technology is the one reviewing or doing some administrative check and screening. One kobo above the budget could mean that your proposal does not even get reviewed. Finally, have an effective sustainability plan. Again, we mentioned here that it shouldn't be generic, like saying government will take over. You have to go down to the nitty-gritty of what you mean by that. Thank you, and be happy to have your questions.
Thank you very much, Gima. That was very detailed, interesting, informative. I totally enjoyed it and took away key nuggets, even for APF. So thank you for being so open and candid. And I see everyone clapping. More claps coming from the group. If you haven't been engaging in the chat section, please do. If you haven't introduced yourself, feel free to do that. This is actually the perfect time to do that. Tell us who you are, where you're signing in from today, and what you do in your organization. But more importantly, we would love to hear if you have any questions. I see a question in the chat. Beatrice, please feel free to unmute and ask the question if you would love to. We can do that. Otherwise, I can just read it out. Would you like to come on?
Yes, thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Can you hear me from your end?
Yes, we can.
So I have a question around budgets. So I wanted to ask, in developing a proposal budget, to what extent should we provide like detailed breakdowns, given that there are many budget categories to cover? For instance, medical supplies for a rescue call, is it necessary to list each specific item?
Please, Gima, feel free to jump in.
Okay. I was not sure whether you wanted to take a few questions before I jump in. That is clear. Yeah, different donors will give you guidelines with regards to how they want budget presented. This is largely, from my experience, to help them better review, help them align things in-house more than, just making it convenient for the partners applying. So the donors want to keep and present things in a particular way. So sometimes, they design those templates to fit their own interests and also to just generate information. Where the donor does not give you the latitude to give a detailed budget, then you have the flexibility to present the budget the way in which, they've required that you do. But where the donor says, present a budget or present a detailed budget, then you really have to give budget or budget notes. Because again, for the budget, you really want to explain things that you feel may not be understood. Is very important. And even when things are being understood, you just want to put a note there to explain why you are doing this. Because remember, depending on the institution, sometimes, the program officer will review both your narrative and the budget, but also the finance people may end up taking a look at the budget and advising. They hardly will spend so much time dealing with the concept and the proposal the way the programs people do. So, but when they just read and they see a few notes somewhere, it may help, just depending on the institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatrice, for that question, and Gima for the response. Are there any other questions, thoughts, or contributions? And if you're not in a place if you're unable to unmute, please feel free to type in the chat section. Okay, it appears you covered a lot, Gima. Obviously, it was detailed enough to give clarity, and I really did enjoy the steps that you took us through, especially, I think for me, just also thinking through what you shared about government and, sustainability. And when you say this project is going to be passed on to an institution or to another organization, being very detailed about that. And also, the government has different arms. So you can't just say government, you have to be specific about which arm of government or which segment you're speaking to. I see a question here that says, what do you consider to be the most important component that raises donor confidence in sustainability aside alternate funding, especially since that is an area many small organizations struggle with?
Oh, I mean, wonderful question, because truly, they have to be other ways of sustaining intervention beyond bringing in cash. There are many other ways. So I give you a couple of examples, but let me bring one that is very dear to our heart. We support some projects that are centered around, behavioral change communication, so that, women can, and young people of, childbearing age can get the right information, so that, they're not caught in the trap of HIV and AIDS. So the partner gets a jingle out there and organize meetings left and right and bring community leaders together. To sustain that intervention, if another donor went in, they will pay for the same set of activities. But nobody is paying for the same activities to continue. The project is still running. How? Partnership, a media outlet that was receiving payment to advertise, develop interest in the intervention, listening to people come talk about it, and the manager realized it was such a big problem in the community. They waved that off, and so again, my point is that sometimes when you work with communities and every relevant stakeholder within the community, people may pick up relevant bit of an intervention and be ready to advance it. But I do realize the fact that, for intervention that need, financial support to continue to roll out services and provide, goods to people, it may be a little bit challenging, especially for smaller organizations. So there again, you must keep in mind that as non-profit actors, all of what we do is supporting government to realize set of objectives that government is supposed to do. So we have to have strong advocacy to government to showcase the work we are doing, the impact of the work we are doing, and why they should consider, supporting that work going forward. Because ultimately, all what we do should be done by government in a sense. So we have to incorporate advocacy as a key component of our work to the relevant stakeholders to take our activities going forward.
Thank you, Gima. There is another question around what to be done when there is no one to pass a project on to. This question is being asked by someone who is providing, or at least the example is in providing free antenatal care services. I'm not sure how clear, I don't know if I really understand that. But Gima, do you understand that question? What happens when you have a project that cannot be passed on? That part I understand. And then the instance is providing free antenatal care services.
Absolutely. I imagine the person asking the question is verifying what will happen in a situation where an organization is providing free antenatal care services, which is, life-changing and life-saving for that matter. Then there is nobody to hand over those services to, and donor funding is drying up. Again, back to the point, I can talk for the context of Nigeria, and I believe it's the same for every other country, that, if we're providing antenatal services to people in Nigeria, no matter the community, no matter how remote that place is, they do have people who represent them in the National Assembly. They do have representatives. So there are people who are voted, elected to represent them. There are people who get resources appropriated in their names. So if I were to advise an organization in that situation, I would say, please, again, because this is one powerful tool we are discovering that, makes a whole lot of difference. We must find who are the representatives, make our case to them, let them know the work we are doing on ground as partners, and let them see the need to find a way of investing in such an antenatal care project. And having said that, I do realize, even for the foundation, that we've had communities where we work and People, we gave them that advice. They went to representative and they agreed they were going to support. And the following year, there was nothing in the appropriation. Luckily for that partner in that situation, the church came to their rescue because the church realized that, they were doing something great. But I think it's important to, have sustained, advocacy with people and representative of the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gima. Is there any other question in the? Okay, I see a question. When preparing a budget, how do you handle exchange rate estimates? That's a good question. Do you recommend using a conservative rate below the current one? Is this person Nigerian? Where are you asking this question from? Yeah, Gima, please go ahead. And then, okay, Yinka has related to this. You mentioned the importance of realistic budgets, but the newer organizations working on the resource communities, grants often don't stretch far enough to show meaningful impact. How can they navigate the tension? So, different from the exchange rate question, but please take these questions as you see fit. Okay, the question about the exchange rate is from Ghana. Thank you, Desmond.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, he's right. He actually provided a solution. So first of all, I would say we in Nigeria, we give our grants in Naira. The partners in Nigeria do not have to bother so much about the exchange rate, right? It will appear that way, but that's not accurate. They do have trouble with the exchange rate as well, because although we do fund in Naira to organizations that use Naira in Nigeria, the exchange rate distorts their plan. And when, the dollar becomes too strong or the Naira becomes too weak, especially for partners we have working in the health sector, if there are things that they're importing or things which are not important, they have to buy in Nigeria, there's a spike in the price of things. So then they get into trouble trying to get the things they want to buy. If you are going to get funding from outside Nigeria and you're budgeting and you want to be careful about the exchange rate, you have to use a conservative exchange rate. This is exactly where the point about the budget note becomes important, because when I used to live in Ghana, the exchange rate, the Ghana cedi was stronger than the US dollars. So it was about 99 to $1. Now the cedi is way weaker than the dollar. So you have to use still a very conservative exchange rate, because anything could happen and you find yourself in a challenging position to buy some of the things you budget for. But what is more important about this is that you have a budget note, so that your donor does not assume, for instance, in the US, does not sit in the US, punch his computer and say, well, here's the official exchange rate. Why are you using this? This organization is not doing the right thing. So you add a budget note, let them understand that this is why you are doing that. I generally advise my friends who bring up this question that, they should get the average between the black market rate and the official exchange rate. So like in our case in Nigeria, when black market is saying, for example, 1,500 and the CBN is saying 1,400, as okay, let's find a middle ground between the two so that, we're in a safe place. Now to Yinka's question about, organization working.
Gima, let me just come in and thank you for answering that question aptly for Desmond. I see that there was a question that Yinka was following up on. So the original question is about, the person is asking also about budgeting. Assuming the funder the funder is giving $5,000, will you advise that we draw a budget with a total of 500 or less than that? And that's why Yinka built on that.
I see. Okay, yes. So if the donor says the maximum, the ceiling is $5,000, keep it at 5,000. I know because we see lots of times. So like in our discretionary grant, when we say the ceiling is 5 million, a lot of time people just put 4 point something, even if they say they don't want to get to the ceiling, so that they're not seem like they want everything. No, but the donor says the ceiling is 5,000. So if your initiative would require 5,000, you budget up to 5,000 and do not go above 5,000. My biggest fear with this is that if you are dealing with human beings all the time, somebody may pick their phone and call you and say, well, why did you put 5,100? Make it 5,000. But with technology, proposals get, screened for many organizations at the initial stage by technology. So when you look at things like budget, have you submitted all the documents and so on, before they come across for review, they may drop you because you put 5,001 cents. So yeah, if they say 5,000, you should put 5,000. And I do agree with Yinka that, for the new organization working in under-resourced community, they should budget to the maximum required by the donor and not to reduce it because truly they are dealing with challenging environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gima. I'm really loving this session. Biodun, you had your hand up. Abiodun Alabi. And I'll come to you, Wisdom. I also see a couple of questions in the chat. Is Biodun frozen? Okay, while we wait for Biodun to come back on, Wisdom, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much. That was a very powerful presentation, and I really loved it. My question is, sometimes when some donor proposals have been floated, you get them putting it out there that your organization must have spent or a budget, an annual budget of something around maybe $200,000 or maybe $100,000. But if you are a smaller organization where your annual spending is probably less than that, but you know that the proposal that is being floated is something that you are capable of executing, in that case, how do you reconcile that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. If you remember at the start of our presentation, we spoke about due diligence. We kept saying, for donors, due diligence is at the core. It's at the core of whatever, funders are doing. And part of the due diligence measure is to make sure that, you are not throwing resources at a problem. Donors tend to want to make sure that, they are funding partners in an incremental manner. So the first year, they're giving you something that is within the boundaries of the kind of resources you've managed before, or within the boundary of what they consider, the right risks for the organization. So for donor A, they may be willing to experiment with a new organization that have never received funding with a certain amount. For donor B, a different amount. However, for organizations that have been working for a long time and have had experience, receiving funding from big donors, they'll tell you that even if you've been receiving $100,000, like the kind of example you're using, or 200,000, if you went and applied for $1 million, some donors may say, well, no, you've not had that kind of money, we'll start at 500. While others want to take the risk. So it's just donor specific. And those requirements sometimes are challenging to change. I always tell my friends that, look, sometimes, as staff within an organization, you are interested in certain things, but also, funders, foundation, philanthropic organizations, they do have their own board that do set also policies based on organizational interest, but also based on due diligence, just making sure that, they're protecting the institution in terms of the kind of risk they can take. So I will say, you have to stick to the requirement of the donor, or you have to write and try to convince them. If those are policies that are set by a board, it may be challenging for you to write to the management for them to do anything about it. You may just have to stay within the boundaries provided.
Thank you very much, Gima. And Wisdom, I'll just add to that by saying that one of the ways that you can also address that is by collaborating with partners. You may not be at that level or at that operational budget level that the donor may be looking at, but sometimes when you collaborate, it's actually easier to pull that off. and then begin to grow from there, just based on some of the experiences that I have had. We have 2 more questions. We'll take those and we will begin to wrap up. There's one from Beatrice. She's asking about the selection process. When you're going through the selection process, do proposals with smaller budgets receive higher priority than those with larger budgets? For instance, if the funding range is between $10,000 and $100,000, would the proposal requesting less funding have a better chance of being selected? I think we've sort of dwelt on, but Gima might speak a bit more to that. I think if there's a specific amount that has been put out, then it's best to work within that limit. But Gima maybe can speak to situations where it's an open, it's open. Maybe you can request for what it is that you require. The second question is, okay, follow-up to the previous one, follow-up question, even if my total budget is less, should I try and match the donors? That has been answered. So Gima, I think the final question is around whether or not smaller budgets receive more, are more favorable to, are favored during the selection process over larger budgets. Thank you.
Thank you. No, not at all. So when you have a range or just a ceiling, so if you say you have an interest in supporting project up to a tune of 100,000, or you say you have an interest of supporting project between 20,000 to 100,000, it means that the donor is willing to invest up to the ceiling mentioned. Sometimes the proposal with a smaller budget are unrealistic because, again, I'm giving different scenarios here. Sometimes, people do not fully appreciate a problem and they want to do something with money that, it's in line with your vision and your mission, but then, does not do a dent to the issue at hand. So again, too small and too inconsequential to deal with the problem at hand. Sometimes, small is not necessarily, a point of attraction. But again, in all my experience, at least working where I work, the size of the budget has never been something that, is considered as being an added advantage for an organization because the budget is smaller. The budget becomes relevant when we look at the budget in comparison to the things you want to do. So the budget is only important as against the things you set to do with that budget, not necessarily, comparing it with other organizations to say, well, yours is smaller. It can also be that, the smaller budget is important when, one has 2 organizations trying to realize the same thing. And for example, one person wants to buy a vehicle, you want to buy a brand new Toyota. You give the year, one person is saying they'll buy it for 1,000, another person wants to buy it for 5,000. Then there, you can have questions, objective questions about why those elements are different. But a smaller budget in the generic sense will not change anything. People will focus on the ideas first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gima. Oh, Biodun is back. This was meant to happen. So please go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My network is the problem today. So I'm from Motherhood NG Initiative. I have 2 questions. One is about, NGO is non-government profit organization, non-government organization. Now, you mentioned something, Mr. Gima. You said that we can collaborate and liaise with the representative of the government within the communities that we are impacting, right? So do you think that it will not, people will not think that we are working with the government, and maybe during the campaign, they will expect us because they have supported our vision or to impact the community, do you think they will not expect us to give them, the kind of campaign and support them? That is number one. The second one and the last one is that I would like you to clarify this. You mentioned something about then my network was poor, but you mentioned something about when you are rendering maternal service to the community. But our is not just about that alone, but like a service, we are training pregnant women, community birth attendants on how to use Google Calendar for immunization reminder. Do you think that kind of initiative can get funding or supported anyway? Thank you.
Gima, please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you, and happy that you're back online. Thank you. Yes, there is a general, should I say, mistrust about, non-profit getting too close to politicians, I should say politicians in a part of the world, in the environment in which we operate. And yeah, and correctly so in some instances, people want to stay clear of, political engagement and activities, especially when the non-profit, especially leadership and institutions do not do work that are political in nature. And so, you want to stay clear those. I do appreciate that. However, when you work with government institutions, like for example, I heard you mention you do work on maternal and child health, and you're trying to work also with traditional birth attendants to promote good behavior so people get the right reminder, go to health facility at the right time. There's just no way you're doing that without, again, dealing with some form of referral to the appropriate level of care. That means, again, you're working with government institution. If you think, for instance, and this has happened to us in Akwa Ibom State, if you think for a moment that that facility, health facility, wherever you want to refer those people, may have been renovated by a representative in government because the person thought that, well, in my village, the people I represent, they need a health facility here. Government has not done anything there. So they lobby so hard and they get resources allocated for the renovation. You end up still dealing with them, whether directly or indirectly, because again, in their campaign, they will say, well, because I renovated this place, women are coming. So my point here is that we can avoid working with government. At some point, I'd mentioned that all the work we are doing are things that, government in most instances should do. But we do realize that, everybody, as somebody asks, who is government? We say the people in government. They say, well, when you carry a government ID card, don't you think you're part of government? Everybody is working to support, what government ought to do. We can always work with people in government without being, political and steering clear of politics. So you make it clear. If you're working with a representative or guy representative, this is social work. It is bringing together people from all divides, maybe people who support their party, people who do not support their party. We do not want to milk the water by talking politics here. We do not want it to look like it's only for beneficiary of people who support you. We try to stay clear of that. So if you receive a grant from the foundation, you will see there that we strongly encourage community participation and government participation. We need government to be part of the things you do. And that way, we feel that is the best way to be a stronger community where, the community in which we engage, the government and ourselves as development partners are all working in sync. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gima. On that note, we are concluding this session. We really appreciate the time you took to prepare for this ahead of today and also to spend with us in spite of your schedule. A lot of people don't know that Gima is actually in a remote part. You might not think it's not a city, but he's
Taku.
yeah, he's in Taraba State, and T.Y. Danjuma Foundation just launched a project yesterday, and he stayed back so that he could take this session. So thank you for making the time and prioritizing APF and for being patient to answer our questions. I will now hand it over to Lisa Karen, our officer for StartPoint at APF, to share the next steps.
Thank you so much, Gima. This was a very insightful session. Our next webinar is in November, so please, everyone, stay connected with us so that you can get all the updates as soon as they come. Join StartPoint at startpointafrica.org. If you are not already part of us, you should join us at startpointafrica.com. And if you're already part of us, we encourage you to update your profile so that you can be visible in our directory. Because when you're visible, you have access to exclusive grant opportunities within and outside of our community. You also have like increased visibility. That means funders and partners will be able to see your organization and all the good work that you do. After the session, we'll be sending you a survey because your feedback matters to us. So please, please, please fill our surveys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of the day and week. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.